Hello, everyone. Welcome. Happy Thursday. Thank you so much for tuning in. Hello, and welcome to the Brooklyn Rail's 798th New Social Environment. I'm Eleanor, a programs associate here at the Rail, and I have the pleasure and privilege of being your MC today for a conversation featuring Filreis, Herman Beavers, Julia Bloch, and Cole Swensen. Before we get started, the Brooklyn Rail acknowledges Black Lives Matter. Here in New York, we are on Lenape-Hoking, the unceded land and waters of the Wappinger, Canarsie, Munsee, and Lenni Lenape people of the Delaware Nation and Shinnecock Indian Nation. We recognize land acknowledgements are not a replacement for necessary decolonial work, but they serve as a reminder of place of the legacies of dispossession and enslavement that sustain and enrich the stolen land we're speaking from. And now to introduce today's amazing guests and host. Filreis has published numerous books and articles on the literary politics of modern poetry and painting and literary and cultural politics of the 1950s. He's the recipient of many accolades and awards for his teaching. He's director of the Center for Programs in Contemporary Writing and founder and faculty director of the Kelly Writers House. With Charles Bernstein, he co-founded and co-directs PennSound, is the publisher of Jacket2 magazine, and is a member of several boards. Herman Beavers is the Julie Baron Platt and Mark E. Platt President's Distinguished Professor of English and Africana Studies at the University of Pennsylvania, where he's taught since 1989. He teaches courses in 20th and 21st century African American literature and creative writing. His poems have appeared in numerous publications and anthologies, and he's also published 2 scholarly monographs as well as 3 chapbooks. Julia Bloch is the author of 3 books of poetry, most recently The Sacramento of Desire, and has published essays on modern and contemporary poetry in a number of journals and anthologies. She has been the recipient of numerous awards and is the director of the Creative Writing Program and co-editor of Jacket2 at the University of Pennsylvania. And our host, Cole Swensen, is the author of 17 volumes of poetry and a collection of critical essays. A book of hybrid poem essays, Art in Time, was published by Nightboat in 2021. A former Guggenheim Fellow, she's also translated over 20 volumes of poetry, prose, and art criticism from French, and won the 2004 Penn USA Award in Literary Translation. We are so thrilled to have everyone here today, so thrilled to have these amazing speakers, and I will pass it over to you, Cole. Thank you.
Thank you so much. And thank you all for being here. And particularly thank you to everyone from the Kelly Writers House who's here. I think it's going to be a really great conversation. We follow a very simple program. Every month when we do Publishing in Transit, it's always focusing on a small press or an organization that really is responsible for keeping small press poetry, keeping poetry period alive in this country. So we're always trying to kind of put the spotlight on the people in the background who are really doing the work. So we've got some great people who are doing exactly that, the work that keeps poetry alive in the country. So we're going to start with 2 very short readings from Julia and Herman. And then we'll go into a conversation and then segue into a Q&A, and then end with a reading by Filreis. So I think let's just go straight into the poetry, and I'm going to hand it over to you, Julia.
Thanks so much, Cole. Thanks, Eleanor. Thanks to everyone at the Brooklyn Rail. Super big fan of the Brooklyn Rail and really excited to be part of this event. I'm just going to read 3 poems. This first poem is called Apology to Los Angeles. I'm sorry because winter. I'm sorry because Lost Angeles. I'm sorry because the hand is the most versatile of instruments and even 0 is a position. I'm sorry for the subject line in the email. The window opened and a hard piece of metal flew in from the street. I think that must have been what happened, just the dirty structure of everything. In the morning, the peacocks at Hollywood Forever walked around and around in caged circles, and I was the cat. I was the house cat. So that was a sort of sonnet. I have a second poem, which is also called a sonnet. It's called PST Sonnet for Pacific Standard Time. And it's an adaptation of Shakespeare's Sonnet 120, which begins, "That you were once unkind befriends me now." So this is PST Sonnet. A glass hug, a shaken sense. Even your shirt was lying, your whole body full of liquid. There is a word blocking the bow. There is to go shortly. There bar, there sacroiliac joint. Let's to the stone gallery. A video, ball drop, 1969. A ball turns upon a windshield and smash, just like that. So let's ransom this hotel. Let's put a fee upon this feeling. 2 various centuries. Look up all the bones of the body to see what you can spare. Dark, gray-green, not everything can be cited. I must, needs, green face lies, fall apart for the day. Like I said, a glass hug. And the third poem I'm going to read is called Goodbye Aspen. It's from my most recent book, The Sacramento of Desire. To order a tank associated with an icon requires at least 6 discrete steps. For example, converting ink signatures to PDF and selecting raw or washed. The nitrogen tank arrives chipped and gleaming in satiny yellow adhesives, tripping plastic, labels, paper, or a book built from the logics of loss. The preliminary image of the pelvis appeared unspecified. Reading this produces a theory of lyric. An uncompostable grief owes its weather to diesel drifting across the grasses, owes an apology to fields of sparked nature, also apology to the raw and washed, to the contracted and anonymous, apology to the known and unknown. I mean the gift and avuncular. I mean salt and shudder. I mean the debts in my mouth. I mean remembered branch. I mean dead cramp. Trigger shot. The assignment was to write a series of emotional sentences to spite Gertrude Stein. Why cut the lines at all except some outdoor imperative? There's that facing page again. I'll cut the lines like thread, but why or why bother? Future is oversaturated. Sentences like fat. Oh, here it comes again. Breath and jars and cells and vials. 2 big bleeds, 1 small one, absent all the clear plastic, mud on I-80 running in the lungs because of the rapturous clone forest dying underground. A leaking seatback, a killed shut, an overwoven antler, a skin of the drone, fanciful apparent nylon edges, all the found joys. Go drink your herbs. So goodbye, ash, aspen, once weed tree. Pull the garlic from the body, unlock the glass shower, take the middle path past the molded dormitory. Goodbye, contract method. Goodbye, known and unknown avuncular chronology, tilted futurity in blue swells of the Coppist Valley. I couldn't catch my breath in Aspen, so I stopped waiting and I took the rim. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Julia. That was a great way to start. And now Herman, please carry it on.
I'm going to read 2 poems. This poem is titled Hamilton Railroad Station. He can't stop thinking about corn. Strong and serious as a woman, hands on her hips, waiting for the old man to come home and do damage. Black clouds, lightning and thunder, but no rain. This is a day he could love. It's so hot, sin sits closer to the ground than prayer. The crowd at the baseball field waits for the game to be called. He's looking for the last one out. The station master ambles under the clock carrying a trumpet so shiny it could send light bounding off into space. A single note levitates loud and sweet on the air till the heat closes around it, leaving the wine of souls caught up in a soft rustle of forgetting, bodies leaving what they need behind. If he wasn't catching this train, he'd be picking cornholes out of his nails, heading to the back door of the farmhouse to be with Alma Jean before her husband gets home. She'd stare at him for 5 seconds and then say, "Get on in here," like she was losing time and had a good mind to go over every inch of his body till she found it. Maybe that explains why he's come to hate the sight of a cornstalk, stripped to nothing, its green husk shrugged to the ground like the dress sliding off a woman with better things to do. He looks down the track, sees clear to the next county. There's a defiant crow perched on a power line. There's a ribbon of lightning lashing heaven to the ground. And this next poem is a sestina. And it has no title except sestina. Whoever it was said we need have no fear of the dark. Must have forgotten the machinery of the mind, its power to manufacture armies of ghosts. Folks down south say they can feel the power of sundown when the moon claws into an unrepentant sky and an inexplicable light cascades through the blood. Question: do we live to write our names in blood? Does our courage falter when we stare into the dark? Last night, I listened to a jet plane tear open the sky. Wide awake, I felt like a gear slipping, my mind tumbling into overdrive, thoughts falling down a dark tunnel, people with ghosts, each one holding a grudge, the way all ghosts do, I suppose. Face masked with blood, I began to ask each phantom moving down the line if they could hear the dark music thumping in the rain, if they minded when the blues crowded everything out of the sky. Sadness bending each note, hunching in the sky so loudly, it made their task as ghosts redundant. A single spirit spoke up. "Mind?" he asked. Then, "Would you like more blood tea?" He held out a cup filled with darkness, told me he would answer, but only if I drank it down to the dregs. As I did, I knew deep down it was pointless to scan the parchment of the sky for anything resembling truth. "Do you like the dark?" the spirit asked. I felt myself going ghost, my body opening to the air, my blood singing a tune straight from the mind of a Parker or a monk, minds that could take rage, strip it down as if they lived only to rob my blood of all its history. Lifted into the unwilling sky, I knew then that we are all of us ghosts whose tears lend substance to the dark. Writing this, I feel myself a cousin of the dark, as if each ghost preempting the arching sky shouts in the darkest hallways of my blood. And I guess there's time for one more poem, which is short. This poem is called Sononesio on a Line from E.E. Cummings. In your most frail gesture are things which enclose me. In a cloud of music so elegant it calls for evening clothes, shoes polished to mirrors, black tie and tails, and you so close, the backbeat thumps through our bodies till our eyes close under soft blue lights. On this dance floor, smaller than a closet, we zoom past the Earth's next closest star, speeding breakneck toward another galaxies whose secrets will only be disclosed upon our arrival. Its planets dancing like shirts on a clothesline, jerking in the wind. Clothed in blackness, stars conjugate light's imperfect grammar, opened then just as quickly closing. Let's say a prayer for the closed-minded. The people biting hands that didn't feed them, whose flat palms close into a fist, equate foreclosure with living. What if music's purest light, the kind a Selmer makes, could clothe itself, then step out into the night?
Thank you, Herman, and thank you both. Just so great to start with some poetry in the air, since that's what the Kelly Writers House is all about, is the writing that's in the air. And because the house is so important. I'm thrilled that Al and Julia are both in the house. So I thought we might start with just a little bit of a evocation of the space. We can see the great room behind you, Al. That's really wonderful. And the view that you've got, Julia. So maybe you can tell us a little bit about the house itself and the history. One thing that I'm really wanting to know is how you got the university to give you such a great house.
It's a good question, Cole. Hello, how are you? Thank you so much for having us. This is a great program. Yeah, the house was built in 1851. It's the second oldest house at the University of Pennsylvania. It was pretty old university in a pretty old city. And it was many things over the decades. It was a private home for a while. Then it was apparently a sandwich shop at some point. We're not sure exactly about that. We do know about the architecture. It sits on what used to be Locust Street, which is now Locust Walk, with a deal that the university made with the city of Philadelphia. Locust Walk is now, still a city street, but there's no vehicular traffic on it. So what you can see behind me are the windows we reproduced from the old cottage. And the color is not Victorian, it's actually Tudor. Victorian would be much brighter. This house was meant by Samuel Sloan and the people who created these houses as a kind of a throwback house. Even in 1851, the idea was, oh, this Victorian stuff, it's too contemporary, let's go back. So it's a cottage, 14 rooms. And behind me, you can see some dense plantings that we've done to make the place feel like a little house in the country. And beyond that is Locust Walk, which is the main student and faculty and staff thoroughfare around the university. 28 years ago, I wish I could say I was sitting around minding my own business. I wasn't, but I was the undergraduate chair of English. Herman was here. He had arrived in 1989, and we were trying to stir up some trouble, good trouble, around the university. And a new president came along, Judith Roden, and a new provost, Dan Chodorow, both of whom I am still grateful for. They began to look at the real estate, and they found, any university, anybody here who's part of this group who's associated with the university or is in a city with the university, if you just walk around the university, there are all kinds of homes and houses. Sometimes homes and houses that the university doesn't even know it owns. And this happened to be one of them. It was a residence for the university chaplain. And the idea circulated around that it would be really great if we could use this house for something to support students in a way that was not affiliated with an academic department or one of the 12 schools of the university. A freestanding free space. That was the idea. Make long story a little shorter, it came to me and a group of people. We decided what the University of Pennsylvania needed, and maybe what Philadelphia needed, was a house for writers. Immediately, we set to work. We kind of squatted the place. We spent a lot of time here trying to figure out what it would be. The original planning group, now called the Hub, decided what each room would be. And to this day, with one exception, to this day, every room serves the purpose that was the original design of the faculty, students, staff, alumni, and Philadelphia writers who created the place as a kind of communitarian act. And so that's what it does. We have no card swipe at the front door. We're the only building at the university that doesn't require an ID card, a university-affiliated ID card. And people can come in and they see the sign out front that says Writers House. And when they come in, they basically declare they're interested. They're either writers or interested in writers. There's no other reason to come into the building other than that you're interested in what it says it's going to be. And about 500 or so people use the house each week, and people come and go. We're not affiliated with the curriculum, even though courses are taught here. And Julia Bloch is the director of the creative writing program, which is part of the Center for Programs in Contemporary Writing, which I direct. And that is our curricular writing programs. But the Writers' House is devotedly ecumenical, open-hearted, open-ended, open-doored. And it really doesn't identify in any kind of sectarian way with a certain kind of discipline. And we've been doing this, we founded it in October of 1995. We opened in the spring of 96, and we're still here.
Right. That's a great synopsis. Herman or Julia, do you want to add anything? I know, Herman, you again have been involved since the very beginning, and Julia, you're involved in a day-to-day basis with the intersection with the curricular stuff. So maybe Herman, do you want to tell us a little bit?
Sure.
perspective?
You know, it was a very rich time because the Kelly Writers House originates around the same time as the Cave Canem Poetry Retreat, which was originated by Cornelius Eady and Toy Derricott. And so it was a sort of perfect dovetail, if you will, because I remember the first reading we had in the house. Al, did we have chairs? I don't remember anybody sitting down.
We didn't have chairs. It was called Writing a Community. We put the word out and 130 people came, which proved to us, Herm, that people were really interested in having a space like this.
Well, you know, I grew up in the Baptist church. And so by virtue of that, people have church standing up all the time, all this time. So it wasn't totally unfamiliar to me. And you know, it was a communion.
You see the pew behind me?
Yeah.
We designed this. We designed the Arts Cafe so that
all that's missing
kind
is
of
the
a feel.
tambourine.
Yeah.
It was such a moment, and you know, up to that point, I really hadn't revealed myself as a poet to my colleagues. Al knew I was a poet, but very few of my colleagues knew that I was a poet. And so Al inviting me to this reading was a real turning point for me because the Writers House gave me the opportunity to be 360 degrees of myself.
That's well put. That's a great expression. Yeah. Julia, do you want to add anything about, I was thinking about architecture and its relationship to intersections among different programs in a university?
Yeah, I'll start with space, right? So I'm in one of the small classrooms upstairs at the Writers House. What's so special about Writers House is that it's extracurricular. It's open to everyone. You do not need to be a student or staff member or faculty to enter here, but you in fact can also take a creative writing course here for credit in the building. So I'm in one of the two gorgeous classrooms in the building, room 203. I don't know if you can see behind me, but it's a non-traditional classroom in that there's a sewing machine behind me. There are schools of yarn over there. So this is a classroom, but that it also doubles as a project space, as a creative space for students to do all kinds of things with writing and other arts, including apparently a lot of fabric arts and yarn arts. There's a big projector for doing all sorts of interesting multimedia stuff. I've taught in this room before and I love it because we've got this beautiful view outside with, you know, the trees and the squirrels and birds making appearances in flashes outside. And I'll just add that one of the things I love about this space for our curriculum is that, well, among other things, you know, the creative writing program is an exclusively undergraduate program. And so we are really here to support and foster writing among young writers. And it's really exciting to me that we can devote all of our resources to those writers. So every single one of our faculty is a serious, working, widely published writer who is passionate about working with undergraduates in particular. And I'll just add, I was not here for the founding, but I did do graduate work here at Penn. And I remember when I came to do a PhD in literature, the Writers House was the place where you could, in fact, be a poet, even as you were being a scholar and coming up in the academy. And that's really special too. I don't know that there is any place quite like it. When I graduated and I left Penn for my first job, someone asked me what I was going to miss most. I said it was the Kelly Writers House. And apparently that manifested the fact that I would come back a few years later to work here at Penn. And so what's really great is I get to teach students and advise students, but also participate in all the incredible stuff that happens here. So I work alongside faculty who are always curating readings, whether that's visits from writers from all over, or putting together events with students, or sometimes with students and visiting writers. And last night, I had the great pleasure of convening our honors thesis readers, and we had a fabulous, very long but very energized reading by students working across a number of different genres on their long form projects. It was a really great celebration.
Cole, I think this is a moment where I'll take us on a little tour of the Writers' House.
Great, fantastic.
I'm standing in the dining room. This is where the most important things happen. Food is the second biggest line item on our budget. Food makes the world go around. Everything here has to do with food. As I walk through the first floor of the house, you'll get there's going to be extraneous noise because the Writers' House is a living being, breathing noisemaker. This is the living room of the Writers' House, also originally the living room. I'm going to step out into our garden. Tonight, we are going to have our annual party. So I don't know if you can see it, but we have a tent set up. We have our tent set up, and we do programs outside in the garden once in a while. And we're all set up to be able to connect, doing live streams and so forth in the garden. I'll take you to the kitchen, which is the most important room in the house by far. We kept the domestic kitchen here. So here's our kitchen.
Wow.
And it's the most important spot, a distress table everybody sits at. The people who were here seem to have run away. We're a little obsessed about our collective kitchen. So, everything has signs on it. You have to put things back. It's very collective and collaborative around here. We have our own studio. We built a studio to make recordings. Here's the control room of the studio, and the studio room itself, which is acoustically a room within a room. This is where Poem Talk and much of PennSound gets recorded. And the studio is probably, except for the kitchen, the highest in demand of all of our spaces. Julia is upstairs, so I won't go up there. I'm passing back through through the kitchen, and I'm going to sit down for a second with Dylan Fritz, who is one of our students. And there's Dylan. Hi, Dylan. I'm going to sit next to Dylan.
Okay.
This is a surprise, right, Dylan?
This is a shock.
Hi. Dylan, where are you from?
I'm from South Carolina.
How did you get here from South Carolina?
So I went to a school with a creative writing program, and we were visited by Jamie Lee Jocelyn, who's the assistant director for recruitment here at the creative.
We have an assistant director for recruitment.
We do. And I met her in my junior year of high school.
So she came to South Carolina to recruit you to apply to Penn.
She in fact did. I don't think I even knew that the Writers' House existed, or that I might not have even known that Penn was an Ivy at this point. I was very, very unaware. And she told me about Penn, told me about the Writers' House. She gave me like copies of all the magazines that we have here that are supported by the Writers' House. And I eventually got into Penn. She became my advisor, and she gave me a job working here at the Writers' House.
You work here?
I do work here quite a bit. So now I do like recruitment and stuff for the Writers' House as well. So I get to talk to prospective high school students all about Penn, and especially about the Writers' House and how much it's meant to me over the past couple of years that I've been here.
What's the difference between being here in the space of the Writers' House learning and teaching and being around the rest of the university? Is there a different vibe?
Yeah, absolutely. I think first of all, I think that the Writers' House just in general has a much more welcoming kind of vibe. And I think that comes from the fact that we have like a little kitchen, and we have our, like, I just know everybody here, and it was an actual house. So we still have the same, like all of our like furniture and couches, and it's just a really nice a welcoming space for people. And
So feeling at home is not just a metaphor.
no, it actually feels like a home. And it is. And then I think the classes that I've taken here too, I've taken a couple classes with Al, but a couple of like writing workshops and stuff too. And they're all so much more collaborative, I feel like, than a lot of the classes I've taken. We don't even have desks when we sit in Al's class. We all just, we sit in a circle and just to kind of talk about whatever we've been reading. And it's all very collaborative, which I really like. Which has meant a lot to me.
Dylan, thank you for letting us surprise visit you.
Yeah, thank you
Dylan.
so much, Dylan. To have a perspective of the student is really, really valuable.
Absolutely. Thank you.
Really great.
Back
And
to you,
thank-
Paul.
Well, thank you for that great tour. To see the space, it just really gives us an idea, makes it concrete. So thanks a lot. I'm actually going to shift now rather dramatically, because I know that the Kelly Writers House is the hub of a series of other programs and projects, and that Al, you've been sort of a pioneer in online teaching and presentation. And I'm thinking about the ModPo and everything else, the Poem Talk and Jacket2 and PennSound and all of these things that, despite the gravity and architectural concreteness of the Kelly Writers House, all of these are online. And I'd love to hear about each of them. I'm sure everybody would, but also about how a concrete space maybe enables exploration into new modes of digital occupation as well.
Mm-hmm. Well, that is I love that question, and it's a capacious one. Let me see if I can focus my answer and turn to Julia to say a word or two about Jacket2 when that comes around. And Charles Bernstein has joined us. He may be in a car, but maybe he can turn his camera on and drive carefully. I hope he's not driving. There he is. And maybe when we turn to PennSound, Charles will say a few words. And I'll start with ModPo and Poem Talk. Hi, Charles. So yes, you're right, Cole. Thank you for asking. We began immediately at the Writers House to record everything. Even in as early as 97 and 98, we would begin to experiment with webcast, live interactive webcasts, which was very early and creaky. And we set up recording equipment in the Writers House very early on. So it was a natural. When Charles Bernstein came to the University of Pennsylvania in 2003, and he had his already established ideas about the importance of making available free for download recorded poetry readings, it was a natural to do that. It was natural when John Tranter, who was beginning to think about retirement from Jacket magazine in Australia, he looked around for a successor host. It was natural, I think, for him to turn to us. And when the pioneers in the so-called Massive Open Online Course, MOOC, in 2010, 11, and 12, the pioneers at Stanford and at Harvard and at MIT who were beginning to do that, they were looking for people in the humanities who might teach a massive open online course. It was also because of our reputation doing digital things, Cole. It was a natural for them to come to us and see if we'd be willing to do that. The Poetry Foundation was looking for podcasts in 2007, and they turned to us as well. So I just described PennSound, Jacket2, ModPo, and Poem Talk. You ticked them off as well. We didn't acquire them as a master plan, but they all came to us. And we said yes. We said no to a lot of things, but we said yes to all of them. And they wind up reinforcing each other. Just to give you an example. So Jacket2 will often feature commentary upon PennSound materials, or commentary or book reviews associated with materials that have been posted to and taught with ModPo. So, and PennSound is a sort of, I don't know, it's the center of all things having to do with poetry audio. And so it's constantly, all these materials and resources are constantly circulating. And I'll stop after saying one more thing. And this is something that I'll focus on in my reading at the conclusion of this event, all with the idea that was a founding anthemic concern for us, which Dylan kind of conveyed to you. The space is in a university, but it's not meant to be a traditional I teach, you learn, I speak, you listen, I talk, you take notes, I am, you aren't, right? I stand, you sit. Reverse that it's too pretentious to call it free-arian, but in a reformist way. The idea was that teaching and learning in a space that is devoted to making poetry and making art, it would be ironic to do the old authoritarian thing of saying, we have the resources, you want the resources, so come and get them. Rather, we want to give it all away. So everything I just described, PennSound, kind of astonishingly, when it was created, everybody was selling MP3s, free and open. ModPo, we have a current enrollment of 72,000 people worldwide in 179 nations. Everything is free. No one charges anything for ModPo. So the Writers' House becomes a kind of free distribution center for resources in all these areas, and they are interlocking. So maybe we'll turn to Julia to say a few things about Jacket2, and then Charles about PennSound, and then we can come back to me about ModPo. There are a bunch of ModPo people here, so don't be surprised, Ray Maxwell, if I call on you to say a word or two. So Julia, how about
yeah, I'll just
Jacket2.
chime in quickly to say that Jacket2 is definitely founded also on the principle that there's a long history of poetry and poetics and poetry scholarship and criticism being not quite of and often outside the university. So of course, John Tranter founded Jacket, in his upstairs office in Balmain in Sydney. And when it came time for him to retire, he came to us. And among other things, we provided a stable home for the entire archive of that journal, which was one of the very first journals of poetry and poetics to be online. And we also took the opportunity to keep it going in the form of Jacket2, so sort of second generation iteration of that publication. So we are here at a university running an open access scholarly journal that is not bound by the constrictions of peer review, does not ask for anyone's credentials when they submit materials, that publishes commentary and scholarship by anyone, no matter what your affiliation with whatever institution or no affiliation with any institution whatsoever. And of course, we were able to expand, John's original vision to include things like streaming media, galleries, an entire section devoted to digitizing and archiving and making available out of print little magazines and journals, which otherwise would fall completely out of access. And so what we've been able to do is continue that legacy. And then, as Al says, connect to all the other projects happening here. So another great example is, we might have an event downstairs in the room where Al is right now. Something like we celebrated the anniversary of Gertrude Stein's Tender Buttons with a number of talks and tributes. We then were, then we took all the material that was presented at that event and edited and curated it and expanded it for a feature in Jacket2. And we've done similar things with lots of programming at the Writers' House. And then, as Al mentioned, invited folks to come and write commentaries on what's happening in the PennSound archive. Again, uncovering transcripts of conversations that otherwise might not be quite as accessible and available to readers to whom those materials are quite precious. So it's a sort of radically, inclusively intellectual enterprise.
Right. Thank you.
Charles, do you want to? I'm sorry, Cole, go ahead.
No, I was just going to say thank you, Julia and Charles.
It's
Why
great
did
to
we
be
create
here.
PennSound?
Before I say that, I just want to note that because I'm on the University of Pennsylvania Zoom account, I was able to find a stock photo from the University of Pennsylvania. It's as my background, it's the closest I can come to being back with Herman and Al and Julia. I retired from Penn, but the 13 years that I spent, 16 years that I spent there were centered on the Kelley Writers' House, and it's fundamental. And I loved the way Al did his tour with the camera moving to break down the normal staticness of the Zoom, because there's a fantastic group of people that we work with, including PennSound, who help us with the technology and so on. So Al, as he said, really pioneered what the NSE, this series is, which is live simultaneous broadcast, something I was actually always more skeptical about, much more interested in the archive, as this will be archived. But he always liked the idea of having it done live. And so years before anybody else, you could see events at the Kelly Writers House. And I think this speaks to the ethos, not just, it's a lot of stuff. It's great if you could be a Penn undergraduate, be at the Kelly Writers House, but what Al has done, especially Al in this case, is to make it really a university without walls in the most radical sense through Mod Po, as he says, tens of thousands of people participating in that space. And PennSound is another way that we're making things available. We are housed at the University of Pennsylvania, but anybody can access it. It's completely free. It's all of our archives are completely available. There's nothing that's held back. There's no ads. And so far, we haven't done any fundraising. I don't know how long that's going to last, but we've managed to make these thousands of files, thousands of hours of archival recording, going back from the first audio recordings of poetry. So Al and my interests combined to make this archive possible.
Thank you, Charles. Cole, I wonder if we could, and Ellen, I wonder if you could unmute Ray Maxwell and Vijaya. I think they're both here. I don't know if they're able to turn their cameras on. This is all spontaneous, but Ray and Vijaya have been involved in ModPo. And there is Ray. Is Ray starting to emerge? I'm seeing Ray halfway. There he is.
Yes.
Can you unmute Ray, Eleanor? Oh, there's Ray. How are you doing, Ray?
I'm doing okay, much better.
Good. Ray's been ill. I'm glad to see you. Ray's been involved with ModPo since 2012, and he is a TA, a community TA in ModPo. He had a career in diplomacy and military, and retired, and has a degree in librarianship, and has been a ModPo regular, and has really taken the ModPo idea and expanded it to his own programs. Ray, do you mind spontaneously saying a little bit about your ModPo experience?
Sure. Since you mentioned it, I've taken the ModPo model and expanded it through the OLLI program here in Washington, OSHA Lifelong Learning Institute. And so far we've run 2 separate groups of classes since 2018. One doing the plays of August Wilson. August Wilson's not a poet as such, although he was a poet. But we've done close reads, collaborative reads of his plays, all 10. We do 1 per week for 10 weeks, and we run that 8 times. And just recently, we've done 2 programs with Zora Neale Hurston's works. One, her novels, and one, her mainly anthropological writings. And so it's going over well. The people get an introduction to the ModPo method, but I don't think they always remember it. But it's the same method that ModPo uses. So we're doing our part to extend the craft, so to speak.
Thank you, Ray. And I wonder if Vijaya is available to turn her camera on and unmute. I don't know. This is all very spontaneous, Cole.
Good. Best things are.
I know. There's Vijaya. Hello. Can you unmute? There you are.
Yeah. Hi, everyone. Hi, Al.
Let me introduce Vijaya simply by saying this. The ModPo team does a trip every year. We go and we do our videos, and we do live webcasts on location, Cole. It's quite crazy. And we brought the whole group out to Chicago. Now, Vijaya has been in Northern California. But guess who came all the way from Northern California to meet us in Chicago, to see us in person? It was Vijaya. Tell us a little bit about your ModPo experience and what has it meant for you?
I wish I had the ability or the ability to articulate what I really feel about ModPo, but all I can say is that, like, I'm just an ordinary housewife, and like, I feel that I learn every day as I'm doing ModPo. We are currently doing a slow-po course on Hank Lazar, and it's amazing. We're doing some shape poetry by him, and I don't know. And the Chicago experience, it was magical. I think I should say that Al has made the Kelly House like a house of possibilities. And it's a wonderful experience. I don't know. Only people can just come join ModPo and really understand what it is. It's just fantastic.
One more thought, Cole, before I'm sure we turn to another question that you have for us. Vijaya suggests what I hope is true, that ModPo has a home base. It's the writer's house, and Vijaya and Ray and Anand, who's here as well, and a number of other people, they look at this space, and even if they've never been in the space, actually Ray's been in the space a number of times, but even if they haven't been in the space, they think that's my home, that's my poetry home.
Yes.
And then when they happen to meet us, as Vijaya did in Chicago, we're friends. We're friends, we're colleagues, we're interlocutors, co-interlocutors, co-curators of the materials. So she's, refers to herself as just an ordinary housewife. She is a fine close reader of poetry, and you can give her the mic and say, read this line, and she will do it. And it is just a marvelous thing to think about a student like Dylan, whom you met, who is really in the same situation as Vijaya is, being confronted with this reformist, or possibly, I think Herm used the word radical, and so did Charles, radical version of poetry education, and be in more or less the same place. The difference being that Vijaya is getting this experience mostly digitally and completely without fee. And that is how we can do this kind of radical accessibility thing. And it is, by the way, also for someone who's been in the biz for a long time, this is my 38th year at Penn, I'm never bored because I get to hang out with people like Ray and Vijaya all the time.
Thank you. That's great. And thank you, Ray and Vijaya, for just leaping in and contributing. That really gave us an extra dimension. Really valuable.
Thank you, everyone.
So thinking about networking, which seems like a very important part, your collaborations, your partnerships, and the communitarianism that is at the base of everything that Kelly Writers does. I wanted to ask about the connection with the West Philadelphia community beyond the university. And I think, Herman, you had some ideas on that, or some experience with that would be really interesting to hear about.
Well, I don't have direct experience. I do work on my own in the West Philadelphia community. Interestingly enough, Ray, you'd be interested in this. I teach a class, a seminar on August Wilson, and we invite the West Philadelphia community to be members of the class. But, just in general, Penn exists, and the Writers' House is located right near where a lot of people think of as the end of the campus, which is 40th Street. And you literally have students who don't venture past 40th Street in West Philadelphia, which is sad, because it's a very vibrant neighborhood, and with people that have lived there for a very long time, who have beautiful homes and beautiful gardens in front of their homes. And I just a couple weeks ago was at a renaming of 49th and Walnut as Paul Robeson Way, in honor of the great actor, performer, and activist. And so the Writers' House has always invited people in. On any given day, you may walk in and see 5th graders or 7th graders or 8th graders doing things in the house. And in keeping with what Al said, I do think it's Freudian. I don't think that's in any way hyperbolic. Everybody's voice is valued. And so by virtue of that, those boundaries that we set, as an institution between us and West Philadelphia, the Writers' House is like a portal that people can step in and out of West Philadelphia. So when they come to the house, they're still in West Philadelphia. And I can't say that for the entire campus, but at the Writers' House, that is definitely the case. And they're welcome in the house. Penn has had a number of missteps in its dealings with West Philadelphia, but I think the Writers' House has actually gotten it right in a variety of ways.
Great, thank you. And just to kind of continue on from that, I'd love to hear more about the pedagogical principles, particularly as they are related to politics and to ethics. But given the time, I was thinking maybe we can touch on some of those through talking about some of the specific projects that go on at the Writers' House, such as the student-based publications and the letterpress and other. Julia, I was really intrigued to hear about the writing and the other arts, and perhaps the letterpress is part of that, but I'd love to hear more about those other arts. And also, the one thing I maybe will touch on at the end is the edible books competition. So I'll just, maybe Julia, do you want to start us off with something on that?
Yeah, I think Al will be able to speak to this too, but I'll just quickly say, just to reiterate what I said before, the great thing about classroom space in the building is that it's very permeable. It doubles as student activities, craft space. Also, writing groups gather here. So this is a classroom in which you can take a class for credit, but it's also a classroom or a room in which folks from the community, from West Philly and elsewhere in the city, come regularly to write together, to have readings together. And I mean, Al, I don't think I'm mistaken in saying those groups have been meeting here for years, almost since the founding, right? Like these are really, really long running community writing groups, self-governed, using the space, going downstairs to make coffee in the kitchen, coming back up to write together. That's really meaningful, again, to have a university space that's open to folks in that way. And then maybe as Al's talking, would it be awkward for me to walk through the upstairs of the Writers' House to show some of the other spaces?
No, not at all. And be sure you go into the student project space and open up the crafts closet, because we don't look down upon the idea that while you're studying or reading, you shouldn't open up the crafts closet and make something with glitter and paper and glue. And it happens all the time. I do it sometimes too. Yeah, I mean, let me, Cole, take that wonderful question as an invitation to talk about the pedagogical ideas.
Please.
We founded the Writers' House at a moment in the mid-90s. We're seeing the library now. Julia's taking us through the library. Hi, Julia. That's a nice spot you got there. We founded the Writers' House at a time in the 90s when a lot of universities were struggling with this. This is the crafts closet. You want to open it? I think it's unlocked. There it is. Look at all that stuff.
And so organized. Amazing.
Sometimes when I lead a tour with parents of prospective students and the students, and I show them this closet, the parents look at me as if, wait, we're going to be paying all this tuition and it's like middle school, with craft time. And the students' reactions, just as the parents are frowning, the students' reaction is, oh, wow, this room, by the way, has a beanbag. You want to show us the beanbag? Is there probably someone in it? The beanbag happens to be available. Cole, you can jet in from Paris and get your time on the beanbag. This is the students' project space, which was enabled by, oh, look, there's some people in there. Enabled by Howie Lipson, who is an alum, who is a member of our board, our advisory board. And Howie he kind of went through Penn's education and felt like he wasn't really kind of learning. He didn't have the learning styles, as we would call it now, that would make him receptive. And so when he got here in the 2000 teens with his daughter, Courtney, who became a student, he felt like it might be time to help Penn create a space that he would have thrived in when he was a student. And so he gave us the funding to build that room, the student project space, which leads me back to this issue of pedagogy. The idea in the mid-90s was that we weren't, and I think the conservative and people on the right who were criticizing universities during that first iteration of the culture wars, I think they were wrong in many ways, but they were right in this one way. We weren't talking to each other. I could teach a class with, let's say, a progressive literary critical point of view in Bennett Hall at the university, of, let's say, the naturalist novelists or the Harlem Renaissance poets. And then a student could walk out of my class and go into College Hall, into a history class, and be taught by Alan Kurs, who would teach the same material from a very different perspective. And those two courses were never in conversation. And Alan and I, who were colleagues, who disagreed on almost everything, we would go out for beer once in a while and argue, but we never did that with our students. And I tried, before the Writers' House was founded, I tried as a teacher to see if we could break down the sacredness of the classroom. Is that the right way to put it? I go into my classroom and you are here with me, you students. And if you want to find out what Alan Kurs thinks, you got to take his class. And there was really never a conversation. I think Gerald Graff wrote a book about this at one point, something called Teach the Conflicts. I don't agree with Graff's approach on that. I wouldn't have put it so negatively, but it inspired me to think about a space that became available in 1995, where we would check our academic rank at the door, where if you're sitting in a room at a reading by Ray Armentrout, you're sitting next to an undergrad and a high school student and an experienced poet who's not academic, not affiliated with the university, and in front of you might be Vijaya, who came in, visiting from California, and behind you could be a community member who's never been to a poetry reading before. What university spaces really allow for that? Find the resources for it, bring in someone like Ray at cost from California, where she was at the time, pay for the meals, the hotels, and then make it available for absolutely everyone, and become that agnostic as to who gets to ask the question. And that latitudinarian to be able to not distinguish between a question that might seem relevant and one that might seem way out from left field, and to allow all of it, as Herman and Julia were saying, there's a lot of listening that goes on. So the pedagogy of the Writers' House, which is all implicit, we don't actually ballyhoo it that much. It's rare for me to be speaking about it in this way. The idea is come into the door, have equal access to the resources, whether they are novice poets or veteran poets, experienced, eminent ones. And I'll end this little riff, this little mini sermon on a perfect example. The first time John Ashbery visited, he visited the Writers' House 4 times, twice as a Writers' House fellow. And the first time he visited, we organized a dinner, which is the best way. This was the best way to get John to relax, because John reading from a podium was very diffident, as those folks who saw John in practice or seen videos, very diffident, monotone, a little nervous, You get him at a dinner table. Wow. He'll say things that were completely crazy and memorable. And we set up the dinner with John to have a student on his left and a student on his right and a community member across from him. And the student who was sitting to his left, who hasn't given me permission to tell this anecdote, so I won't say the person's name, but the student who was sitting to John's left spent the entire dinner talking to John. This is a student who had felt like my poetry is nothing, I'm nobody. It was because of the fact that it sounds kind of normal to say this, but at a university, it's often radical. The eminent poet doesn't sit and get placed next to students. You know, it would be for the grad students and the full professors and so forth. So the Writers' House pedagogy is all about creating the structures. First of all, food. Second of all, dinner conversation. And third of all, a student gets to come to be part of the conversation. And that student has been utterly transformed by that dinner. And it was only a 90-minute experience, but access to someone at John's level. So the Writers' House is sort of, its pedagogy is set up the system such that that interaction can happen. And it's as simple as that.
It's simple, but takes a lot of persistence, a lot of energy, and a lot of commitment to that concept, to that egalitarianism, to that communitarianism. It doesn't happen by itself, and it just clearly has been attended to and works. Looking at the time, maybe let's just finish the conversation with the edible. I just love this idea so much, the edible book contest. If you would just tell us a little bit about that. And
happy to. Edible books. I wonder if you would, who doesn't know the Writers' House here? Eleanor, can I put you on the spot?
Sure.
Okay. If I said to you, we're going to have an edible books contest, what would you think it is?
Maybe like cakes made out of books, or
Oh,
cakes
actually
made to
made
look
out of
like
books? Wow.
Cakes made to look like books.
Yeah. Well, yeah. Any food made to look like books. Sounds completely ridiculous, right?
Sounds good to me.
sounds like
good.
fun.
First of all, the obvious thing, literary communities need food, as much food as possible. Food, food, food. Food is everything. You can have the dullest event in the Arts Cafe, which is where I am, and then move into the dining room behind me and put out good food and wine and beer and tell people they can stay as long as they like. And you will, the honorarium will have been worth it. I'm serious. It all happens there. We sometimes do the radical thing of having our receptions before the event. I think anybody in this Zoom who creates literary events should contemplate that and write me for other radical suggestions about putting on an event. Anyway, yeah, so edible books. Edible books is a contest where students who are not necessarily writers, but who aspire to being in a kind of book vibe place, they get to participate. So they create an item of food, and they work out a pun, and they put a label on it, and we have a contest, and we give prizes out. So 50 Shades of Earl Grey, that was actually kind of easy for someone to produce. The Crepes of Wrath, which was for me the best, absolutely the best, the tastiest of all these over the years. We've done this for many years. Hamlet, which was an omelet, Hamlet. All Quiet on the Western Bunt. That was good. My favorite of all time, the Divine Creme Brulee. The Divine Creme Brulee, not the Divine Comedy. And then a sad note, a student who, like Dylan, was recruited by us to come to Penn, in this case, in Dylan's case from South Carolina, in this case from Orange County, California. His name was Blaze Bernstein. And Blaze loved food and writing together. And so he got turned on by the annual Edible Books Project and became like the chief of the, became like the kind of student director of Edible Books. And then sadly was killed during winter break, killed by a homophobic, violent homophobic person in a park in California. So it's a well-known story and easy to find out about it, and very sad for us, obviously. And so everybody who loved Blaze got together and created a fund. And so now, believe it or not, Edible Books is endowed by the Blaze Bernstein Memorial Fund. And almost every year, his parents, Blaze's parents, come to visit and help judge this contest. And so it has a bittersweet aspect to it, but it is, Cole, we are committed now legally, because there's a gift agreement. We are committed to Edible Books every year forever, as long as the Writers' House exists. So I'm really glad you asked about that one, because we have to do it.
Oh, what a gift of a have to. That's
Yeah.
really, really great. Well, thank you all so much. And, thanks, obviously, Al and Herman and Julia, but also Dylan and Charles and Ray and Vijaya. It's just great that you were willing to leap in, and the other students who were in the background just really helped give us all a really concrete sense of the place. I think we all want to be there. We probably have time for a couple of questions, so I'll turn it back to Eleanor, and maybe you can let a couple people ask things.
Yeah, thank you, Cole. Thank you so much, Al and Herman and Julia, and to all of the students and Kelly Writers House community members who jumped in today. That was so fun. First question will be from Chloe.
Hi, everyone. Thank you so much for this amazing conversation today. My question is, what role do you think archives play in developing future writers and in having material to look at over time and changes in time?
I'm going to turn this over to Julia in 30 seconds, because this is something she cares about a lot. And Jacket2, part of the function of Jacket2 is to archive. It's the crucial thing. When I hired the current director 15 years ago, Jessica Lowenthal, she said, what are my top 3 priorities? And I said, the first priority is don't let anybody burn the house down, because if you burn a house down like this, if a house like this burns, the business school will take over and build a 15-story glass building, and that would be the end of it. The second priority is take care of the students, make sure the students are okay. And we've had some tough moments for students, as everybody knows, everybody who's in higher education and education at any level know. Take care of the students. That was my second thing. Let's make sure that we are here when the students need a little intellectual and other TLC. And the third, Chloe, was archive. Everything has to be recorded. Everything has to be stored coherently. We have to have all the media servers available. We have to have paper archives. So we've been committed to archiving everything that's happened here. And it's not simply that it all happened when PennSound started, but PennSound is crucial in causing us to think about the importance of the archive. And I think we turn students on to this as well. Young writers who hang around the Writers' House think immediately, let's see if we can preserve what we're doing so that others can find it coherent later. And I'll say one more thing and then turn it over to Julia. We're committed, the pedagogy of the Writers' House is to form a circle and have the leader not talk so much and have everybody talk. So share the burden of learning and creating art together. And so our goal is to create events that are not replicable, right? That are spontaneous, where, let's say, a collaborative close reading of a poem turns into something we never anticipated. At the same time, it sounds paradoxical, but at the same time, we want to record that one way or other, so that what seems to be not replicable in another setting is at least stored so that you can watch the spontaneity later. And that's a way of adding to the literary archive something that every time is unique. Julia, your thoughts on this?
Yeah, it's a great question, Chloe. I have 2 main thoughts on it. Number one, in terms of the pedagogical principles of this whole place, I think all of us kind of believe that you don't learn by watching, you learn by doing, and you learn by doing alongside each other, and you learn by doing alongside the person in the room who supposedly knows more than you, or set up the room, or figured out what poems you're going to read. And so archiving is a huge part of that. I've heard from high school teachers all around the country who look at videos from ModPo or other parts of Writers' House alongside their students and use it as a model for how to do learning in the classroom, how to read poems in the classroom. The other quick thing I'll say about archives is I believe that archiving is an act of preservation and tradition, but it's also an act of interpretation and selection and curation. And so one thing that I've been really excited to do during my time, especially with Jacket2, is use the archiving impulse to figure out who's missing and who needs to get into the archive and who's been overlooked. And so we will often ask work study students to think about what voices have not yet been archived, to figure out who needs to come in and get represented. And also thinking creatively about how to navigate those archives. Navigating archives is not always obvious. And so how do we get to learn together, how to use the archives, how to learn from them, how to be creative about them as scholars and as creative folks.
Those are amazing answers. Thank you so much. As someone working on the NSE and archiving myself, it was really inspiring to hear those thoughts. I'm going to ask one more really quick question. I know we have another question as well. And audience members, we want your questions. So post them in the chat and we'll pass the virtual mic to you. My follow-up question is, has Kelly Writers House and being involved with it impacted your writing practice, and how?
I'd love to pass that one to Herm. He already started on that topic earlier.
Well, the quick answer is yes. And if I were to elaborate, I would say that when I came to Penn, I certainly subordinated creative writing to scholarly writing, because those were the conditions under which I was hired. And the Writers House really invites me to put them next to one another, or in a sort of horizontal relationship. And I think that, and Al and Julia and Charles have been saying this, the way that we do work is different here. It's one of those things where, you may carry the bucket of water a certain distance and somebody will pick it up, and then somebody else will pick it up. And in the end, we've done this collective thing that is more than just carrying a bucket. And it's an amazing thing, because writers can be very territorial. They can be, reclusive. And the Kelly Writers House makes it okay to be those things. But you can't be those things in an authoritative sort of way. It breaks down the barriers. And so I've taught my poetry workshop in the Writers House several times. And the real joy of that is the students are doing things that I did not know how to do as a poet until I was in my 40s. It's a wonderful thing to see that. So they're teaching me. And the other thing is, you come across young people who are absolutely secure in the idea, in this moment where we are squarely situated in fascism, that their spoken word poem, their short story, their nonfiction piece is taking back something that people are trying to rob from us. And that makes the Writers House a rejuvenating place to be. So after the 2016 election, we had a poetry jam session about freedom and about, democracy, and folks showed up for it. And, it really kind of just bubbled up from the ground. I mentioned it to Jessica Lowenthal. She said, this is the date that I think you can do it. And then we did it. So it's a wonderful place that way, because in that respect, I wanted to hear lots and lots of voices, and they showed up.
Thanks, Herman. That was awesome. Does anyone else want to jump in on that question?
I'll just say really, really quickly. Yeah, I definitely have grown as a writer here by virtue of the sheer contact. So I'm a shy person. I'm a person who likes to write alone, but I've been so fed and saturated by being able to circulate amongst so many other folks in this house over the years, even when I wasn't even living in Philadelphia. When I left grad school, I was living across the country. I had a totally different job, but I was doing webcasts and I was doing online book groups and I was corresponding with folks. And this place has always been a touchstone for me. So yeah, I'm almost speechless trying to think about how the Writers' House has affected my own writing, because it feels so second nature, like second skin type of thing. But it really is. It's everywhere in my writing. Absolutely.
That's lovely. Thank you, Julia. We had a question from Ben. Ben is wondering if we could hear about the name or contact for the program in Washington, D.C. that Ray runs. If anyone knows that or could put that in the chat.
I'm sure if you allow Ray to unmute, he can tell us, or anyone can reach out to us here and we can put you in touch with Ray.
Yeah, you should be able to unmute, Ray.
Yes, I've added, it's in the chat, but it's OLLI, Osher Lifelong Learning Institute, which has sites on several different university locations. The one that I've taken advantage of is at American University. And I also mentioned in the chat that just recently I've done a cooperative thing with DC Public Library, and there seems to be some demand for these types of programs in the public library system, where they have adult reading, different types of book clubs, different types of programs. So there are lots of opportunities.
Thank you, Ray. And I'll add, anybody who wants to join ModPo, it's very easy. It's free. And you just have to go to modpo.org. Modpo.org.
Thank you, Ray. Thanks, Al. And we'll share that link in the chat again. I would love to ask the last question today before we move on to a reading from Al. I'm wondering for all of you to answer, what do you imagine, or what are your biggest hopes and dreams for the future of Kelley Writers' House?
I don't mind starting, but I can't wait to hear what Julia and Herm have to say. I think when we had our pre-meeting yesterday, Cole suggested, and she did it today too at the beginning, suggested that it's might strike people, and maybe is a miracle, that a big institution space could be cleared for this kind of activity. And it is kind of a miracle. I don't think the Writers' House could be created at Penn now. It was just a moment. And don't take this the wrong way, everyone, but people have tried to replicate it at other universities, and it doesn't always work. There's a lot of reasons why, and I won't go into it because it'd take too much time, and it'll also make me a little depressed. But there was a moment, and the recipe is you have to create it at the center. It can't be created in a department. Departments, sadly, don't work this way. They departmentalize. So the miracle of having to create it is one thing, but now 28 years later, how does it stay? How does it keep going? Particularly if the founding faculty director isn't going to live forever, although I fully intend to do that. It has to move on. It has to have a new era. And sadly, anyone who's leading an organization like this needs to learn how to do fundraising. And the future, this is a very practical thing, but it isn't. It's also visionary. The future has to be endowment, because endowments require the university to continue doing the work. So if you make $1 million endowment, if someone gives $1 million, then the annual interest is somewhere between $40,000 and $50,000 that comes to the organization. And that would strike a lot of people who need $1 million as sad, because I'd like the million so I could spend the million, but you can only spend the 40 or 50,000 and the million stays invested. the only way for a thing like this to continue is if that $1 million gift has a gift agreement that says it shall be for this always, which obligates my successors and my successors' successors to do those things, including edible books, for goodness sakes. So this is the hard part, and we will do it. We're in an endowment campaign, and we will do it. And that will make all of us who care about the place now lose a little less sleep over its future. And this is a very, even at the university where everybody's all about trying to create endowments and do permanence, even they are surprised, because you have literally, actually, endowment fundraising is future oriented, because it makes no sense given your current needs. And so that's my very practical answer. Fortunately, we're stable enough with our annual funding to be able to do endowment fundraising, but that's hard. Anybody who's interested in doing this kind of institutional poetry work needs to face the fact that you have to build something that will last. And a lot of people assume that because we're associated with poetry, that we're fuzzy-headed, oblivious, and don't know how to make things happen. And you have to teach yourself how to do that. And it's been fun learning. There's my future. Julia, what's your future?
Yeah, I'm glad you talked about the money so that I don't have to, but I will say that actually intertwined with the fundraising model of the Writers' House is intertwined with the other version of the model of the Writers' House, which I think is its sustainability, which is that this place is populated by people who work at the university who believe fundamentally that the Writers' House should come from the students. It should serve the needs of students. It should follow the guidance and inspiration of the students. So that's why there are not a lot of things that happen around here that the students aren't inventing themselves. There are longstanding projects that have a legacy, but that's because the students are still really into them. Like edible books is still really popular with students. That's one of the reasons that it lasts. And so I'm really excited to see what the students are going to come up with in the next year, in the next 3 years, in the next 5 years, in the next 10 years, what writing is going to look like to them. It's already changing a lot, no surprise. Students are writing on their phones, to take the most banal, obvious example I could possibly come up with. And we're responding to that. And this is a place that it could not be more in love with how students want to engage with writing.
Herm, do you have a thought on this?
Just one. And the Writers' House already has momentum in this direction. I would really like to see us partner with historically Black colleges and universities, which don't have creative writing programs. But I just came back from visiting Spelman, where there are lots of students who want to write. We could facilitate that. And it'd be a way for me to strong arm Penn and let me go to Spelman to teach for a semester.
Okay.
Thank you
There's
so
some Penn
much.
administrators listening, so that's
Thank you so much for those answers. That was really inspiring. To conclude, I will turn it over to Al for a reading.
Thank you so much. I thought it might be fun or interesting and edifying if I read 3 poems. They're short, very short. 3 poems that are anthemic around here. That is to say, that are widely understood when we talk about them to be related to us, to what we're trying to do here. And then I will read literally 3 sentences about open access. A member of the ModPo community heard me talk about one of these 3 poems I'm about to read and sent me 5 tenets about open access, the theory of open access, and I thought I would read those. So the first anthemic poem is by Sid Corman. It's called It Isn't for Want. And if you just imagine the poem as a love poem in which the you is the lover being addressed by the speaker, that's fine. That's no problem. It's a good reading of the poem. Probably is a love poem. But if you think of the you in the poem as the reader, as you, then you get what we're trying to do at the Writers' House. It's called It Isn't for Want. It isn't for want of something to say, something to tell you, something you should know, but to detain you, keep you from going, feeling myself here, as long as you are, as long as you are. What Sid is saying there is, I do have something I could tell you, but that's not why I'm doing this. And I do have something I think you should know, but that's not why I'm writing this poem. And I do think there are things that you should know, but even that I'm not doing here. What I'm doing is keeping you with me so that you as a reader make me possible. The second poem is a John Ashbery poem that is beloved around here. And the reason it's anthemic is that, and I think Herm implied this at one point, the Writer's House is a place where the anti-pre-professional students like to come. The University of Pennsylvania is dominated by the Wharton School of Business. And if you're a poet, sometimes you're like actively mocked. Wait, why would you go to the Writer's House? Why would you do that? So this is anthemic for the students because they love the idea that John Ashbery valorized just wandering, going in no particular direction. And as I read the poem, all I want you to do is think of, instead of the speaker of the poem, the Ashberian speaker, as wandering through a city or town, meandering. Think about how he or you could feel the productive, creative loneliness of being counterproductive and off-putting in a space with others who feel the same way. Just walking around. It's actually kind of a self-elegy, so it's a very sad poem. What name do I have for you? Certainly there is no name for you in the sense that the stars have names that somehow fit them. Just walking around, an object of curiosity to some, but you are too preoccupied by the secret smudge in the back of your soul to say much and wander around, smiling to yourself and others. It gets to be kind of lonely, but at the same time off-putting, counterproductive, as you realize once again that the longest way is the most efficient way. The one that looped among islands, and you always seem to be traveling in a circle. And now that the end is near, the segments of the trip swing open like an orange. There is light in there, and mystery and food. Come see it. Come not for me, but it. But if I am still there, grant that we may see each other. And the last poem is by Erica Hunt. That can be found in the fabulous selected poems of Erica Hunt, Jump the Clock. And it's called Reader, We Were Meant to Meet. And it is anthemic at the Writer's House because we push forward this analogy that mostly works and sometimes doesn't, that the writer is to the reader as the teacher is to the student, as the one who speaks is to the one who listens, as the host convener is to the participant community member. So writer-reader establishes this revisionist idea of learning and being part of a writing community. It's called Reader, We Were Meant to Meet. Reader, we were meant to meet and not disappear in the dredging of edited ledgers, omit antiphonal groans. Reader, you were meant to be legible, even in the failure to communicate. Your will to resist snatching defeat from the jaws of easy victory, the truth slips in as a figure of speech. Reader, step into my room. This page faces you. What will I miss if you blink? What will I miss if you blink? What blots the ink, pens and hems the imagination? What hides in the brackish backstories hostile to the wobbled word? What resists being pinned to the truth? Reader, we are carbon, and more, the exact degree of life is inestimable. Some of us chew ice and others suck chalk. Some crave salt before there is savor. Others can never be too full of sugar or bourbon, sucker punched and stunned by death's pugnacious brawl into dreamtime and song, extending both ends, night into day. Touch, reader. We were meant to touch, to exchange definitions and feed the pulse of language. I promise, if you step in, it will propel you, me, it, topple distinctions, ease doubt and belief, and all that in between. And finally, as a result of a conversation that we had in ModPo about that poem, one of my ModPo participants sent me 5 tenets of open access. I'm going to read 3. They're a sentence each. And just to give the right credit, these were developed by Carmen Papalia, an artist in Canada, published in the winter 2018 issue of the now defunct Canadian Art magazine. Here they are. And Cole, thank you so much for having us today, giving us a chance to talk about these. These are the ideas, I think, that promulgate the Writers' House. First, open access relies on those present, what their needs are, and how they can find support with each other and in their communities. It is a perpetual negotiation of trust between those who practice support as a mutual exchange. That's one. Second, open access is radically different from a set of policies that is enforced in order to facilitate a common experience for a group with definitive needs. It acknowledges that everyone carries a body of local knowledge and is an expert in their own right. And finally, open access is and this is my favorite, open access is a temporary, collectively held space where participants can find comfort in disclosing their needs and preferences with one another. It is a responsive support network that adapts as needs and available resources change. Thank you.
Thank
So
you so
amazing.
much. Thank
Thank
you
you.
all. And thank you, Rail, for giving us the space and creating the possibility for conversations like this one.
Thank you so much, Cole, for your amazing questions. Thanks, Al and Herman and Julia, for the reading and the amazing conversation. Thank you to the Terra Foundation for sponsoring this NSE program and for supporting our archive. For the past 22 years, the Rail has provided a platform for arts, culture, and politics in our monthly publication and public events like our daily NSE. Please check the chat for a link to donate to support our work. Join us tomorrow at 1 p.m. for a conversation with Enrique Wancosa and Marianne Cause on the event of Juan Miro, Absolute Reality, Paris 1920 to 1945 at Guggenheim, Bilbao. We'll conclude with a reading by John Coletti. Thanks to everyone for tuning in today, and you can turn on your mics and say hello and goodbye as you leave. Thank you. Have a great rest of your day.
Thank you so much. That was amazing.
Thank you. What a wonderful
Thank
guest.
you. Thank you. Fantastic.
Thank you so much.
Have amazing afternoons, evenings, wherever you are in the world, mornings.
Take care, everyone.
Bye, everybody.
Thank you.
Thank you all for
Bye.
coming.
Bye.